Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BC. Alexander the Great. Let's go.
For Alexander the Great's legendary campaign against Darius III of the Achaemenid Empire, the winter of 332 to 331 was the calm before the storm.
Interesting. So
During
they were
that
just
time,
getting their
the
troops
Macedonian
ready.
army had what amounted to a holiday in the gentle lands adjacent to the River Nile. But that holiday was now over. As the mountain snows thawed and the spring began, two of the greatest armies of the age were on the march. Alexander's force was smaller, but had proven itself supreme multiple times in the realms of discipline, technology, and command. Darius's newly raised imperial army was massive, its warriors drawn from the seemingly endless reserves of his continent-spanning empire.
Just wasn't led by Alexander the
Persia
Great,
was
was
about
it?
to face off for one last
That
time
is the
against
big
Macedon
difference.
at the Great Battle of Gaugamela in 331.
Okay, let's
Having
go,
better
Kings
gear
in General.
makes a big difference. Ever since his epochal triumph at Issus 2 years earlier, Alexander had been methodically reducing every potential center of resistance in the western part of the Achaemenid Empire. Syria had been secured and administered, followed by Phoenicia, Palestine, and the jewel in Persia's crown, Egypt. But as spring of 331 BC arrived, it was once more time to move on, this time into Persia's imperial heartland. The advance would be risky. Disconcerting news was even now arriving from Greece concerning Agis' revolt. All the king could feasibly do at this point without abandoning everything he had
Don't remember from the other series. How does he deal with the rebellion? I'm probably just being an idiot.
accomplished was to send a great fleet of 100 ships to aid any harbour supporting the Macedonian cause. Apart from that, putting down the Greek rebels would be left to Antipater and the men under his command. With that considered, Alexander again turned east, where Darius and a colossal Persian army were waiting for him. Following one final bout of administrative fine-tuning, the king marched his army to Thapsacus, a major link between Syria and Mesopotamia.
Okay.
He arrived between July and August, but an advance force under Hephaestion had already been present for some time, and managed to construct 2 pontoon bridges over the Euphrates ready for the army's use.
Smart.
As a sign of the Macedonian engineers'
And of course, Alexander was the one that ordered him to do that. So smart play. So it's just made the whole process quick and easy for Alexander to get his troops across the border, making the whole march just much simpler.
skill, these bridges lacked a final stretch on the far bank, preventing any enemy force from effectively using them, and this proved to be a wise precaution.
Why so? There was
Observing the invaders
there was-
crossing from a
nice.
safe distance was a force of 3,000 Persian cavalry outriders, commanded by one of Darius's satraps, Mazaeus. Arrian seems to imply that Mazaeus' horsemen were supposed to stop the crossing of Alexander's vastly superior army, but it is more probable that Darius simply required intelligence as to what the Macedonians were doing.
Also, their troop size, the troop size, what equipment they may have had, if there was any technology with them, all of that sort of logistical information. And I'd imagine as well, probably to shadow them to see what route they were taking as well, maybe.
There was realistically no chance for Mazaeus to prevent the crossing
No,
by
of course not.
himself. Having learned from previous defeats, Darius III had come up with a plan. 70 years earlier, another invasion force, famously including 10,000 Greek mercenaries, had marched directly down the east bank of the Euphrates with the aim of taking Babylon, as the Persians believed Alexander, notoriously bold as he was, would.
Yeah.
In that previous clash, the invaders had arrived on a wide, cavalry-friendly plain known as Connexa and were stopped in their tracks. Darius hoped to repeat that feat at the same place, further relying on the blistering Mesopotamian sun and scorched earth tactics to deny the Macedonians food, fodder, and comfort.
Will Alexander fall for the trap? And if he doesn't, how is Darius going to sort of try and entice him to take that route?
But while this cunning plan took Alexander's directness into account, it did not account for the king's unpredictability. As a lover of Hellenic works, he too was educated in Xenophon's Anabasis. Therefore, upon crossing the Euphrates, Alexander struck northeast across the Mesopotamian plain, beelining towards the other great river, Tigris. Not only did this completely derail Darius's preparations, but the cooler northern temperatures would be better for the Macedonian army.
As well, if he'd done scorched earth tactics, then those areas would have actually been able to supply him with food and other supplies, which is now not. So it's causing more of a dysfunction to his army as well, Darius's army.
On seeing Alexander's move north, Mazaeus rode hurriedly to inform his master in Babylon. To the credit of the great king and his commanders, this unexpected turn of events did not paralyze Persian preparations, and a strategic pivot was quickly made. The imperial army would move north towards Arbela and confront Alexander somewhere on the Tigris. All the while, Mazaeus would venture upriver, dispatching a tightly knit web of scouting forces to keep an eye on the Macedonian monarch. By the time Alexander got near, Darius's army would be ready and waiting.
Nice.
Meanwhile,
Is that
Alexander
the case,
himself was still crossing the arid Mesopotamian plain, capturing a few of Mazaeus' scouts in the process. It was from these captives that the Macedonians learned, somewhat vaguely, that the main Persian army had taken up a position on the Tigris and was set to throw the Macedonians back if they attempted to ford the river.
So how's Alexander going to counter
estimates
this?
of the sheer size of Darius's massive army were also obtained. If Arrian is to be believed, such speculation simply made Alexander desire a confrontation all the more rapidly. Upon finally arriving at the upper reaches of the Tigris in mid-September, the Macedonian king and his army found neither Darius nor his 100,000 plus men. Faulty or deceptive intelligence from the captured scout, it seemed. Still, deprived of his immediate fight, this did allow the Macedonians to cross to the far bank relatively easily, after which they were given a well-deserved rest before moving on. At about the same time, Darius, vaguely aware of where Alexander was, reached Arbela. The two armies, now on the same side of the Tigris, were getting perilously close to one another. While Alexander continued pressing on with the river on his right and the mountains on his left, Darius managed to find a perfect replacement battlefield for the great plain of Cunaxa near the small village of Gaugamela. He
So it's
marched his
Darius's
troops up
choice
and immediately set laborers
field.
to work, flattening hills, clearing rocks and trees, and employing every possible measure to make the plain as flat as possible.
So I'm assuming then Darius is using a very heavily cavalry sort of focused army.
The great king was so distracted by this that he failed to take the low hills 3 miles west. En route, Alexander had 2 minor encounters with Persian cavalry forces under Mazaeus, but they were easily put to flight. Further prisoners taken in these engagements revealed that Darius's massive army was at Gaugamela, by that point only around 10 miles away. Further investigation uncovered the ground leveling operations and made Alexander realize that Darius didn't intend to move from his pre-selected battlefield, allowing him to encamp and give his men another substantial rest before the climactic battle.
And he's just going to take up on that field. Okay, let's go, Alexander.
During this short lull, the Persians utilized infiltration and assassination tactics, attempting to turn the Greek soldiers against Alexander with promises of gold and other good things. One of these letters was intercepted, and the king debated reading it aloud before the Greeks to emphasize his trust in them. He was deterred from doing so by the ever-cautious Parmenion, who reasoned that avarice recognized nothing as a crime, not even the murder of a king.
Interesting.
Instead, the letter was suppressed and the camp fortified. While most of the army recuperated in camp...
Does that affect the battle throughout, or was it just a little side note? Let's find out.
Alexander assembled a strong cavalry escort and went to personally scout both the battlefield terrain and Darius's army. When he crested the hill overlooking it,
Always got to commend Alexander for the sort of going ahead and being involved even in the scouting
Peter
missions.
Green suggests that the Macedonian king might have second-guessed his earlier bravado about facing the Persians so brazenly, for what he saw was an army larger even than that he had faced at Issus. More than that, it seemed far superior in armament and skill, possessing a large quantity of fearsome eastern cavalry. That night, Alexander sat awake in his tent for hours on end, analyzing the potential of each Persian unit, and considering the potential damage they might inflict, along with the tactics he could use to gain victory.
Okay.
At some point, Parmenion arrived and suggested that a night attack be carried out, but Alexander stated that he would not demean victory by stealing victory like a thief. Alexander must defeat his enemies openly and honestly.
Better man than me. Back in those times, if everyone had enough rest, which they did, because he's rested them twice, I'd be going in.
But even
Let me know what you would do in the
who
comments.
usually gushes with praise over the Macedonian king, found it likely that this haughty response was just a smokescreen. He believed instead that these lofty words probably indicated confidence in danger rather than vanity. Rather than the morality of victory, refusal to engage in an incredibly risky, potentially catastrophic night attack was instead simply a sound tactical decision. Pitched battles had worked wonders thus far, and so there was no need to gamble everything in the dark.
Nah, I would have gone for it.
This proved to be a shrewd decision indeed. While the Macedonian army was resting in preparation for the coming battle, Darius's troops, lacking a camp with fortifications, were actually drawn up in full battle order throughout the night in fear of any surprise assault by the enemy. Not only did the consequential lack of sleep exhaust the vast array of Achaemenid warriors, but waiting hour after hour with nothing to show for it demoralized the Persians greatly, sapping their spirit.
I'm shocked, but before I made my decision, I would have definitely sent some scouts. So I would have got that information and then cancelled going, if you know what I mean. So yeah, but that's so peak for Darius's force because they're going to be so shattered for this fight coming up.
Back in the secure Macedonian camp, Alexander at last crossed the T's and dotted the I's of his intricate battle plan, and then simply went to sleep in the early morning hours. When the sun rose above the horizon on the morning of the great Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander did not rise with it. Instead, unconcerned by the gravity of the occasion, he slept. On their own volition, the various battalions had breakfast and assembled for battle.
No way.
Only when knowledge of Alexander's plan became necessary for deployment did Parmenion, probably rolling his eyes a little, go and rouse the king from his slumber. No doubt curious as to just how the king was able to sleep so soundly when the largest army ever seen was right there over the hill, Parmenion asked him. Alexander simply responded by saying that he had indeed been worried when the Persians had been retreating and laying waste to the line of march. But now that pitched battle was on the cards, by Heracles, he has done exactly what I wanted.
Interesting. That sounds like bravado to me.
Not long later, Alexander and his army strode onto the Gaugamela plain in battle-ready formation. Finally, the Macedonian king and his Persian counterpart were face to face once more, and the great battle for Asia was about to begin.
Look at that force!
But this clash was not to be the walkover the Macedonians
Look at
might
the force
have expected
Darius has.
after their winter of luxury.
I know that they're shattered,
was so massive
but
that
look
its
at it.
flanks extended beyond Alexander's by a significant margin, and outflanking was virtually assured. The Persian left and right wings were commanded by Bessus and Mazaeus respectively, while the great king Darius III himself was stationed in the center. On the left, Bessus commanded thousands of cavalry from his own satrapy of Bactria, together with Sogdians and Aracosians. Additional mounted strength was drawn from the nomadic peoples beyond Persia's northern frontier, who were in military alliance with the empire, such as the Sake and Dahe Scythians, fighting as cataphracts or horse archers.
When the battle turns towards Alexander, are they going to run away? That's my question.
On the right, Mazaeus had Syrians, Mesopotamians and Medes under his leadership, flanked towards the center by Parthian and even more Sake cavalry. Tepurians, Icanians, Albanians and Sacassinians from the Caucasus and the areas around the Caspian Sea formed the link between the right and center. The vanguard of Mazaeus' wing was composed of Armenian and Cappadocian riders. Mixed Persian infantry and Greek mercenaries formed Darius' center, together with the king's personal cavalry, immortals, and the Indian cavalry. Two more exotic units made their debut in this massive clash. First were the great king's 200 scythed chariots, somewhat experimental shock vehicles with blades on their wheels tailored to break apart the fearsome Macedonian phalanx.
Interesting.
100 of these chariots were drawn up just to the right of Bessus's Bactrians, and 50 each in front of the Indians and next to Mazaeus' Armenians. 15 majestic elephants accompanied the Indian contingent. All in all, the Persian army at Gaugamela consisted of between 100,000 and 150,000 troops, 30 to 40,000 of which were cavalry. Alexander's army of around 40,000 infantry and
do we know if
7,000
these numbers are
cavalry
accurate?
opposed this
is like
gargantuan
331 BC.
On the surface, its
these are
units
some
were drawn up
fucking
as they
large
usually
armies.
were. Phalanx battalions made the solid center. Parmenion and his allied Thessalian cavalry stood guard on the left, while Alexander, the companion cavalry, and the king's usual Agrianes, archer and Hypaspist strike force prepared to smash the enemy army on the right. But there were a few notable differences designed by the king for precisely this occasion. Both the Macedonian left and right flank guards were angled inward in order to better withstand a Persian encirclement attack. The second line of 7,000 Greek hoplite infantry was also arrayed behind the first Macedonian line, with orders to turn and face any attempt at encirclement by the enemy.
Yeah.
Hopefully, twisting the flanks as he had, and deploying such a reserve, would hold the Achaemenid cavalry off until the battle was won. Confident in his army's supreme discipline and fully prepared to exploit Darius's plan, Alexander ordered his entire line to gradually shift to the right. Simultaneously, the king personally took his right wing and...
You gotta fucking love Alexander. Smaller force, you would have thought that he would have just gone, no, make him walk towards us. But no, he's going in, he's going for the jugular. We love you, you're the guy.
Began an oblique advance, as though aiming to outflank the Persian line with his numerically inferior forces. At once reacting to this unexpected maneuver, Bessus flexed his strength by stretching his cavalry even further out, always keeping outside of the Macedonians. This in turn dragged units away from the Persian center.
Nice.
All of a sudden, it became obvious to the Achaemenid leadership that by edging his army to the right, Alexander was attempting to move the battle away from the leveled plain, therefore rendering much of Darius's long-planned strategy null and void.
Interesting.
Regardless of his lacking numbers, Alexander continued drifting right until he was just short of the cleared zone. Anxious to avoid fighting on the rough ground, Bessus finally committed his wing by launching a direct charge against the Macedonian right. This commitment was precisely the move Alexander had been attempting to provoke.
If you have an hour this week, on the piano, just more chords, please.
Okay, what you got for us, Alexander? How's this fight going?
Companion cavalry joined battle with the ferocious Sake-Bactrian horse that formed Bessus's vanguard. The Macedonian king fed additional units into the fray from deeper on his flank. Naturally, Bessus responded by committing the majority of his strength with the hope of crushing Alexander and rolling up his army. As this engagement was progressing on the Macedonian right, Darius III believed that the moment had come to wipe out this troublesome invader from the west once and for all. On the other Persian flank, Mazaeus launched an overwhelming cavalry assault against the ever-stalwart Parmenion, who was, as always, desperately outnumbered. All across the line, Persian-scythed chariots, 200 of them, barreled forwards in an all-out
how are these chariots gonna
Macedonian phalanx.
How are they gonna play out in this fight?
Step discipline for which they were known, Alexander's
this battle's intense.
phalanx battalions refused to be intimidated by these contraptions. Instead, they simply opened lanes within their ranks, into which these horse-drawn chariots sped impotently.
And got
a few
stuck.
Casualties were inflicted by the chariots here and there, but an effective combination of Agriani
yes,
Royal Guard
boys.
and army grooms put an end to Darius's wild card, ripping the drivers from their vehicles and killing them.
They've done
On
absolutely
Alexander's
nothing.
right, the clash between the companion cavalry and Bessus's horse intensified still further. For the Macedonians, it was a ferocious battle against the odds, with Peter Green stating that Alexander's 1,100-strong spearmen were fighting a force 10 times its own size. Still more Persian cavalry units from the center entered the fray, attempting to dislodge these brilliant Macedonian warriors. It was then that Alexander saw his great opportunity.
What is it?
The singular focus on Bessus's engagement with Alexander had revealed a dangerous weakness in the Persian left center, precisely where Darius himself was positioned. The line had been frayed, and many units that would otherwise have been protecting the great king were now absent.
Alright, so you've got an elite force. Let's go.
Now, leading a spearhead of his companions, hypaspists, and several unengaged phalanx units, Alexander charged Darius directly.
Shit, and
with
some
the raising of a
phalanxes.
great battle cry,
Go
the
on,
Macedonian king's
Alexander.
wedge
I love seeing
mercilessly
these battles
cut
play
into
out
the
like
formations
this.
surrounding his Persian counterpart. Fighting was brutal and hand-to-hand. Macedonian cavalry spears thrust forward into the faces of the Persians, and Alexander even had more than one horse killed under him. With the help of the phalangites, Alexander scythed his way closer and closer to Darius. The Persian king, who had grown increasingly uneasy ever since the battle began, is said by Curtius to have drawn his sword and prepared to defend himself. However, even with the fate of his centuries-old empire on the line, Darius's skittish nature once more got the best of him. Faced by the rampaging elites of the Macedonian army, the King of Kings turned tail and ran for his life. Witnessing the royal flight, the majority of the Persian center collapsed. This was followed by Bessus's left, which gradually began disengaging in good order. The time was now for Alexander to seize Darius.
I was wrong. They never deserted, but obviously the Indian mercenaries in the center, they've gone to Alexander's camp, haven't they? That's what that little side note was. But yeah, Bessus, I butchered that, and I'm not going to attempt it again. I butchered that. The mercenaries I thought might run away didn't. So
and with
that's
him
interesting.
the crown of the Achaemenid Empire, and so the chase began. However, before the bold and triumphant king of Macedonia could ride to claim his imperial prize, an urgent message arrived from Parmenion. The situation in the rear was critical. Unaware that their monarch had been driven off the field, Mazaeus and his overwhelming cavalry wing was on the verge of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Moreover, a stray band of Persian and Indian cavalry had drifted through a gap in the Macedonian phalanx and were ransacking the camp.
There we go.
Almost certainly gritting his teeth in frustration, Alexander looked back to where his loyal general required his urgent assistance.
Yes.
And forth, where
Go
Darius
sort
was
that
distancing
situation
himself
out.
with every passing second.
Darius can
After
wait.
that second of hesitation, Alexander turned his troops around and charged the inner rear of the cavalry bearing down on Parmenion. Although victorious in this action also, against some of the best Parthian and Indian horsemen, over 60 of the companions were killed in the battle's hardest fighting.
Shit.
With the vast majority of Darius's army scattered to the four winds, and the Macedonians fully in control of the field, Parmenion rode to secure the Persian camp. The troops, meanwhile, were allowed a well-deserved rest. Alexander could hardly be too irritated that his enemy had escaped. Darius's second great army had been almost totally destroyed, his authority undermined, and
he's
the
a
great
weak
king
king
himself shown to be a coward unable to defend his empire.
Weak.
That being said, Darius had slipped the net, first to Arbela, where he regrouped with Bessus, and then further east.
Bessus.
With the defeat of the last of the great king's organized forces, it was now time to move east into the great expanse of the Persian Empire, where Darius was to be captured, and Alexander could move on to the edge of the world.
We all know what
Our
happens to
series on the
Darius.
Wars of Alexander will continue soon.
What
so make
a
sure you are
great,
subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see
episode.
it.
And I hope you're subscribed to their channel and you've got that bell icon here. If you haven't, head over to their channel. That link's in the description box down below. If you haven't checked out their new content or you just want to check out their old content, it's right there for you. If you enjoyed my reaction, look forward to future reactions to this series. You know what you need to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'm going to catch you in the next video.